Hello and welcome to the Legacy Football Podcast. My name is Alex. On my right, you've got Aryan Silva, two-time LBS champion. And below us, you've got Jabo, Jordan Botha, who, if you guys have watched one of the earlier episodes, you've already heard his whole life story. And we are here today as the Chain Gang, talking some football.
Let's go.
Talking some rookie receivers. And how we doing today, boys?
Feeling good, Kamish. Feeling good.
Doing great, man. Glad that we're here. Good to be able to be here to talk about another podcast.
Yeah, definitely, guys. Well, essentially today, I want to talk about some rookie receivers. I know we all got some opinions on who we think the top guys are, and I'd love to get your guys' take on it. So whoever wants to get going on it first, lead it off.
Yeah, so I think the big thing is going into this draft class, there's obviously been a lot of hype around Marvin Harrison Jr., rightfully so. But I think with the amount of talent and the amount of depth in this year's draft class, especially with the other two guys in that top three category, I don't think it's as clear cut as people think. I know we've talked about off the podcast certain people's love for Marvin Harrison Jr. and how people think he's a clear cut number one prospect, but I just don't see it that way. I think Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbors both make a great case to be considered for that number one wide receiver prospect as well in this year's draft class.
Yeah, man, I can agree with you, and I see where you're coming from on that point. I think I'm definitely in the camp that you mentioned first, and viewing MHJ as a generational prospect. I think that when you look back at the prior draft years, I think the best guy in recent memory is Jamar Chase. As far as he was rated, prior to the draft, he was the overall prospect in that draft, and we're looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. as, some people's number one overall prospect, some people's number two, potentially behind Caleb Williams. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. I think obviously what he put on the field, you look at the measurables, and then, you can't deny the pedigree, bro. We got him and Jerry Rice's son coming out the same draft class. So this is going to be a fun one, man. I'm excited to see these guys, what they can do on Sunday.
Yeah, and don't be sleeping on the little C-Mac too, He ain't Christian, but you got another McCaffrey coming into the league.
Let's go, man.
Speaking of rookie receivers,
Yeah, I think one of the crazy things is going to Arian's point. He brought up Marvin Harrison Jr. and Brendan Rice. It's crazy to think that we're finally getting to that age to where we're starting to see a second generation of players to where we grew up watching their dads play, and now they actually have kids that are in the league. Asante Samuel, Patrick Surtain, the guys that Aryan just mentioned.
Frank Gore Jr.
Oh my goodness. It's just so weird being at this age in generation of football now we watch guys, who were guys that we looked up to when we were younger, when we were coming up first watching football.
So I think that begs the question then, who's going to be the best son? Who's going to be the next generation of guys that follows, where their dad left off and carries that torch? And for me, it's pretty clear who that's going to be. That's MHJ, baby. He's just got it. He's got it. And what made Marvin Harrison so special, his route running acumen and just how precise he was with his movements, but also just the elite body control. People don't talk about the way, Marvin Harrison would hit that sideline and toe tap it and just make it look so effortless. And his son does that plus length and potentially plus a little athleticism too. So I think he's going to be definitely the guy coming into this year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on MHJ. He's big enough to where he's going to be a red zone threat day one. He's fast enough to where you're not going to be able to press him on the line of scrimmage because every corner he's going to be matching up against is going to be down 2 or 3 inches at least. He's physical enough to get in the middle of the field. He has one of the best ball tracking abilities in the league coming in.
That's one thing I'll say about his game that I would be a bit of a knock in my opinion. Not that I view him as soft. I would never say that about MHJ. He's an absolute dog. But if you listen to interviews, he's very soft-spoken and very humble and very kind, and I do like that about him. But it just seemed to me like when you watch his highlights, his jersey's always clean. The guy's not going into contact, and he creates so much separation that it's just he doesn't even really necessarily show the physicality, to his game. And I think that's where the other two guys kind of have a bit of an argument, in my opinion, in Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to those two guys, and I know we've focused a lot on the beginning of the podcast talking about MHJ, but when I look at a guy like Rome, you look at a guy and he's got a very specific body type, skill set, comp, to a guy like MHJ. And I think the big thing with MHJ, I think the thing that, because for me, I think, people when I talk about him, I think people think that I don't like the idea of him being the top prospect in this draft at the wide receiver position. And that's not necessarily the case at all. I just think the gap between the next group of guys isn't as big or as far as guys in previous years past. I mean, look at a guy like Rome, right? I mean, we talked about pre draft measurables. Marv Harrison comes in just a little bit under 6'4, 209 pounds, expected to run somewhere between a 4.3, 4.4 40. A guy like Rome went to the combine, tested at a 4.45 40, comes in at 6'3, 212 pounds. So you're talking about a guy who has a very similar skill set, very similar trait of skills, and on top of that, he's being able to prove that on tape. And, in some cases, I would sit there and I would be like, okay, if it was a guy in traditional years past where it was a guy who had a 1 year really good season, like a case of a guy like Quentin Johnson. Quentin Johnson was a guy who had one really, really good season out of TCU, and people fell in love with him late. And obviously, he struggled to transition with that in the NFL. He had a tough first year, obviously, as you know that being a Chargers fan, Arian. But I look at a guy like Rome, and I have his stats right here. This is a guy, not including the postseason, in 13 games, he had almost 1,500 yards receiving, 13 touchdowns. In a junior season, with only 8 games he started in, had close to 1,200 yards receiving and 7 touchdowns. So you're talking with a guy that has similar production, and in some cases, depending on who you talk to, draft expert wise, you know, people could argue has a similar or better skill set to a guy like MHJ. So that's the angle that I come at it from. And maybe just because with me being a West Coast guy, I was fortunate to watch Roma Dunze a lot more, especially towards the later half of the season, because they played in a lot of primetime games. But I just, I think, you see a guy like that, and, I feel like you could easily make a case for a guy like that.
Well, you put a lot out there, but I'd like to start with Quentin Johnston. And I think that Quentin Johnston, what he had 38 targets this season, and or pardon me, 67 targets, and of those 67 targets, he had 38 receptions. And if you watch him play, I mean, he had some bad drops. Like we all remember that Green Bay game. Like there were some situations that he just didn't do it. But I think we've all been there as an athlete. If you're somebody who's ever competed on a field, or Alex, in your case, on the mat, like you sometimes you get nerves, you're like, and he's new out there, bro. It's his first year. He came from a small school. They balled out, and he had a great season. But it's a big jump coming to the NFL for some guys, and it just takes a little bit more time. But when you look at the physical tools that Quentin Johnson brings to the table, I think he's going to be a bright spot for my Chargers offense this upcoming season. So I see him as a sleeper.
Well, that's where when you look at the prototypical size, he has that. I mean, he has the measurables, but those drops were horrible. Like you
Bad,
mentioned the Green
bad.
Bay game, that sideline, I don't know, I think it was either third and long or fourth and long, but it was a crucial down, crucial play, and had it in the
We needed
breadbasket
it.
and couldn't
And
get it.
Herbert put it right there too, and it was just like too perfect. He created separation. He did his job. It looked good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when I look at a drop like that, that's a moment. But guess what else he did in that moment? He created that separation. He got open. He made himself available, and he showed that he can physically do the job. So if he catches that ball, we're having a very different conversation right now. And who knows where his confidence is at after that. He's had a couple of good plays elsewhere throughout the season too. I remember one in particular. I don't remember what specific game it was, but it was like a 4th and 2 situation, and Herbert threw the ball back of the end zone. He had like a pirouetting over the defender, toe tap, and it was just like you just see the tools on the guy. He's got the ability. So
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
excited to see him.
I would be really curious, in my personal opinion, especially with all the changes to the organization this year, obviously with Harbaugh coming in, and the certain moves that they made in the offseason, obviously with them moving on from Mike Williams and Keenan Allen as well. I truly think for Quentin Johnson, especially with the fact that him only having one true year at TCU as a sample size. I think this year too will be a true testament of what Quentin Johnson will look like as far as going forward and his potential in the NFL. But kind of moving back to our topic and what it is that we were kind of talking about with the draft class. Is there a guy outside of that top three? I mean, I know in this
Well, hold on,
class.
hold on, hold on. Before you go to the top three, we haven't even talked about Malik Neighbors. So you can't go out of the top three without talking about the number two guy, in my opinion. And when you look at the ability that
It's like, how
Malik
dare
Neighbors
you?
has, yeah. I mean, hey, bro, you're talking about the Chargers, and who do the Chargers need the most of right now? Probably
Probably Malik
somebody
Neighbors.
like Malik Neighbors.
Probably Malik Neighbors.
You know,
Yeah.
perfect segue. So, I mean, he's the yak god in this draft class. I mean, he has the speed to burn you deep, and he has the shiftiness to be able to cut up field and make you miss.
So sudden.
If I was gonna say that there's a 1B, because I am in the Marvin Harrison camp, where I think he's a if you were building a player on Madden to start your career with, it would be Marvin Harrison. But if you want to have fun playing, if you're the kind of person that takes Anthony Richardson instead of having a Pat Mahomes, I think Malik Neighbors is going to be that fun player to watch, that fun player to have on your team. He's going to be electric. He's going to be exciting. He's going to get you nothing but yak, and then those deep shots. So that's my take on Malik. I don't know how you guys feel about Malik, but he's my 1B. If there is anybody that's close to MHJ, it's definitely Malik in my opinion.
I see why you think that too, and I really what stands out for him is just one word. He's just explosive. It's explosive plays. When you watch him run, it kind of reminds me of like how they say Pacheco's angry at the ground. It's like that, but he's a little bit lighter. It's a little bit a little bit more just pop, and it's like the defenders are watching him and then reacting. They're like, oh shit, I got to go that way now, or oh, I got to go that way now and cover this guy, and he's just so sudden and so decisive, and also great at the point of attack. Going up to get the ball and jockey for it, despite being less than 6 feet tall, which is the major knock on him in comparison to some of these other guys. But he'll go up and get it and fight for that ball with the best, tallest, longest corners. And I'm sure GMs and obviously quarterbacks in the NFL would feel confident throwing that guy, deep shots consistently throughout the game.
Yeah, I think kind of adding to that point, I think when you look at a guy like Malik Neighbors, when you see him listed, he's a guy listed at 6 foot, 200 pounds. I think he's one of those guys when you turn on the film and you watch him play, he plays like a receiver who's 6'2", 6'3", 215, 220.
Body.
He plays with that level of intensity. He plays with that level of physicality. He was extremely productive at LSU. Looking at the numbers here, 89 receptions, almost 1,600 yards, 14 touchdowns. I mean, he was averaging 17.6 yards a catch, and on top of that, he was one of those guys who wasn't a one-year wonder. The year before in 2022, he had 72 catches for over 1,000 yards, still averaging a little bit over 14 yards a catch. His touchdowns, his production was a little low with only 3, but the thing that I look at with Malik as opposed to that I separate with him as opposed to Rome and Marvin Harrison Jr. is what you guys elated to and mentioned earlier is his ability and his explosiveness once the ball is in his hands and what he can do with that. His ability, his yards after catch is something that you can't compare, in my opinion, to a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. or Rome Odunze, because those two guys to me are similar in comparison because what they do from the wide receiver position, body style, body comp, and what it is that they do when you turn on the film. The only thing that I look at with Malik that I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, I guess I would call it a knock, is I don't think he's as polished as the other two guys. I think his route running ability is a little bit to be desired, and I think he still needs some work on that. I think that's one thing that Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rome both have on him, and I think that's something that he needs to improve on. But once again, I mean, if you're a team that's picking in the top 10, if you are able to get a guy like this, you're a happy franchise if this guy ends up falling in your lap.
And
Yeah, I
to
couldn't agree
Malik's
more.
credit, I see where you're coming from with the route running thing and the polish, and that's something that was echoed by Daniel Jeremiah in one of his recent articles. But I think, to Malik's credit, he he has extreme versatility at the line of scrimmage. You know, like you look at Marvin Harrison, and Marvin Harrison lined up some in the slot. I mean, I haven't looked at Rome Odunze's tape that much to know, but I don't think he lined up in the slot anywhere near as much as
Very
Malik Neighbors.
rarely.
Right, and Malik Neighbors, can get all around the line of scrimmage. It kind of reminds me of like a Tyreek Hill at the line of scrimmage, and then once the ball is snapped, it's like a DJ Moore, more explosive, like a DJ Moore 2.0. That would be like my comp for him, and what I see is his abilities. So I see what you're saying about the route running, but I think he can be more effective by just moving him and instantly creating a mismatch at the line of scrimmage, and then he's just so pop quick that your defense can't react.
Yeah. All right, so Jordan, I know I kind of cut you off on the segue that you wanted to go, but I feel like this is a perfect opportunity for you to bring it back up because Malik Neighbors' teammate, most would argue, is in that next tier of players that you were wanting to allude to. So do you want to go ahead and ask your question again?
Tier break.
Yeah, I mean, basically, obviously, as you kind of mentioned, I had brought up earlier, there's a clear consensus as to what is viewed as the top three receivers in this class, and then there's that second tier. I was actually, and obviously we need to talk about Brian Thomas Jr. as well too, but I think it's been kind of shown based off what we've seen from the draft experts as well too, that Brian Thomas Jr. is kind of viewed of as that clear cut next best guy. Now, do you guys feel that way as well too? Because really the question that I wanted to ask is, who do we feel in that next tier of receivers is that guy that we think that teams should be keeping their eye on as a guy who we could view at 3 or 4 years down the road as being one of those guys where it's like, has a similar type of production as maybe those guys in the top three?
So I would say for me, it's Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. He's my fourth favorite receiver in this class. I think if you're looking at the measurables, he has all the measurables to be a number one receiver. I think he obviously has a lot to clean up, but he's fast, he's big. I mean, last year he had 55 catches for 845, averaging 15 and a half a catch and 11 touchdowns. So, and that's a huge jump compared to his injury-riddled season in 22. So to be able to come back from an injury, to be able to play and perform that level with an offense that obviously with Quinn Ewers, they were definitely kind of changing pace with, losing Bijan. And, I think that team obviously wasn't as competitive as they were the year before. But I think overall, A.D. Mitchell to me is probably the fourth best receiver in this class.
I like that, and I think what stands out to me about him, and I agree with you, I have him ranked slightly ahead of Brian Thomas Jr., and it's hard to do that because when you watch the tape of Brian Thomas Jr., it's like every reception is like a long touchdown. That one where Jaden Daniels is flushed out of the pocket, and BTJ he breaks off his defender and then turns upfield and is just moving, and he's just so fluid. He's so fluid, and he catches the ball on the run without losing a step. And he's like bigger, stronger, faster than everybody on the field, And then you look at Adonai Mitchell, and the measurables are pretty similar, but his play style is very different. And what I love about Adonai Mitchell is twofold. Primarily his ability over the middle of the field to catch a ball in traffic and have balls of steel, bro. That boy will go out there in the jaws of the defense in clutch third down situations, fourth down situations, and Quinn Ewers is hitting him. And I like Quinn Ewers too. Coming out, is he, or did he declare?
Next year, I think.
Next year. Okay. But yeah, Adonai, man, he's that's who Quinn Ewers is looking to in those important situations, and there's a reason for it. Adonai's super confident and he's super physical at the point of attack going for that ball. And what I love most about Adonai Mitchell and why he leads this tier break for me is, have you seen that boy dance, dude? Hey, when he gets in the end zone and he does his thing, bro, it's like, hey, this cat's smooth. He's smooth, bro. And that fluidity that you see when he celebrates the plays, it's like, damn, okay, that's how you got there.
Yeah, he definitely deserves a couple extra styles.
For sure.
At least another round or two up.
Yeah. Victor Cruz would be proud of a guy like A.D. Mitchell. But, going back to a guy like Brian Thomas Jr., I have some questions about his potential at the next level, not necessarily as far as the talent, but the thing is a guy like him, he's a guy who only had 1 year of production. He's not a guy who had consistent years of production. He was also somebody that was fortunate of the fact due to some of the talent that he was surrounded with the environment that he was into, especially this past year. You look at some of the notes on a guy like Brian Thomas as well too. There's some questions on his route running ability, his polishness as far as just a receiver in general, his ability to be able to win at the top of the route, especially with the guy of his size. But the thing is it's easy to fall in love with a guy like him, right? Because you look at his measurables, and he's a guy who's 6'3", 210, who ran a 4.340, which I think they showed the statistic, and he's only one of I think 2 or 3 guys in NFL history at that size to run that 40, and the last guy was DK Metcalf.
99th percentile.
And so his comp is DK Metcalf. And so, but the thing is I look at him, and I just like what Aryan said. I watch a lot of his highlights, and I watch a lot of his clips, and a lot of his clips are explosive plays on deep vertical plays that don't really necessarily take a lot of elite route running ability that is required at the NFL, where you have to be able to develop and run route trees and run different route patterns in order to be successful at the wide receiver position.
So on one hand, you could have him turn out to be a guy like DK, and on the other, he could turn out to be like a Martavis Bryant. Not that Martavis was a bad player.
Yeah,
and
I think player. And obviously, speaking for the Martavis thing, obviously off the field things had, I think, a lot more to do with the impact on Martavis's career as opposed to the actual on field ability. But I'm going to throw out a name here real quick before I move on. There's a guy out of South Carolina named Xavier Leggett. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He just went viral recently because of his accent. And he kind of
what does it sound like?
He kind of a lot.
He's a country boy. He's a country boy.
Yeah, where's he from?
Country dude at heart.
Oh, he is.
But he's one of those guys too. He's kind of he's a late bloomer. He's a late developer. His coaches speak to it. He was somebody who was just recently developed into the wide receiver position. If anybody reads into his story, the guy's got an amazing story. This is another guy who's got freak measurables. This is a guy who comes in at 6'1", 221 pounds, running a sub 4.40. Guy ran a 4.3940. Obviously played on a South Carolina team that had their struggles in a SEC. Obviously Spencer Rattler had as we know his ups and downs at the quarterback position with that team, and just in general, that team struggled, and he was a guy who stuck out in a team that had its struggles. And you look at a guy like that, and once again, I think if you put him in a really good situation, like I look at a guy like that, and if that's a guy who ends up in Kansas City with Andy Reid and that type of coaching, with the Patrick Mahomes at his disposal, that's a guy who you could really look at, kind of going back to our conversation earlier. We could be having this conversation in 3 or 4 years from now, and we're looking at this guy going, wow, like how did we not put this guy in the same topic or same category as we did maybe the other guys, or even the beginning of that next tier?
Can I ask you guys both a question? Where do you place a guy? I'm going to say Xavier Leggett or Leggett. I'm going to say Leggett. Where do you place a guy like Xavier Leggett in comparison to a guy like Malachi Corley? Because I think you see some similarities in their play styles, just being like thick, like powerful running type players. Malachi is built almost more like a running back, but obviously he plays receiver and he has that effect in space. It's just kind of unique, almost a Debo-like ability. And Leggett's kind of got some of that in him too. So I'm just wondering where you guys rank those two in comparison to one another.
So I would actually add one more guy in there with that group, just from a physicality standpoint. I would say Keon Coleman kind of deserves to be in that same. Keon Coleman's obviously
different
a lot bigger.
Build. Yeah,
lot bigger, dude, but from like a physical running.
Well, he runs a 4.6. He's got to be physical, bro. Come on.
Yeah.
Arian just brought up a good point about Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman, if you guys have noticed, he's been losing a little bit of steam and hype as of late. Obviously his production dropped towards the end of his season at Florida State as well too. But I saw, I can't remember where the graphic was. I think I saw it on NFL Combine or somewhere on Twitter, but wide receivers traditionally in the past that run a 40 of that caliber traditionally don't have success in the NFL. And I know more times than not, it's really more prevalent for the DB position, specifically the cornerback spot. Like I think if you run anything over 4.55 or over 4.6 from a DB position, it's basically considered a death sentence. I think there's a little bit more leniency there for the wide receiver position, but the biggest knock on Keon Coleman is his ability to be able to separate and get over the top on coverage. When he's sitting there with the guy who's a DB who can run a 4.3, 4.4 40, does he have the ability to be able to separate at the NFL level and be
No,
able
he doesn't.
and make
He
catches
doesn't.
like that? And
And it's not a knock on him. That's just he's not that type of player.
No, he's
He's
just a
gonna
big
be a
dude.
physical. He's gonna be a physical, or like a corner route possession type of receiver, right?
and I hate to say this, but
Mhm.
you almost kind of think of a guy who was also a guy who played at Florida State. If we remember a while back, Kelvin Benjamin, you know,
Mhm.
Yes, great comp,
he
great
was a,
comp.
guy- he was a guy who, obviously as we remember, he had a ton of hype. He had a ton of success at Florida State with the Jameis Winston led teams when Jimbo Fisher was there. They ended up winning that national championship versus Auburn, and he was a big part of that success. He had a little bit of some early success there with Cam Newton, but as we came to find out with him, he struggled to translate at that level because of his ability, because he did not have the ability to separate as a true elite number one receiver. And I think when
He
people look,
still had some fantasy success though.
he
Side note,
did,
Yeah,
he
he's
did.
still a
still had
1,000
some
yard
fantasy
receiver,
success.
double digit
Yeah,
touchdowns.
no,
Yeah,
exactly.
he was scoring touchdowns, and
Yeah.
that's what Keon could
Well,
do.
and that's
Mhm.
where I'm going back to earlier, talking about he did have some success there early, right? And but at the same time, right? Like, well, what is your resume over a long period of time? And when we view these guys, we're not viewing these guys that we're talking about as guys who we think are going to have 1-2 years of success. We view these guys as, especially with this class, this is considered potentially a historic class of wide receiver depth at that position. So we're expecting these guys to potentially carve out 8-10 year careers, multi Pro Bowls. I mean, shoot, we talked about it earlier. Marvin Harrison Jr. is considered a generational prospect at the wide receiver position.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. And there's obviously a lot of talent in this draft. And I think when I look at it and just going over our conversation here today, top five guys I think we can say in this group: Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Romo Dunze, Brian Thomas Jr., Adonai Mitchell, and is that four or five?
That was 5.
That's five. Right? That's
Yeah.
five. So sorry, I can't count. I can I can talk, but I can't count. Oh man. But yeah, so I think those five guys is kind of like the consensus top five guys, and I think from a fantasy standpoint right now, pre-draft situation, that's the best we can do. Really, kind of just like seeing it for what it is there. But after those guys, is there a sleeper that you guys have in mind? And I just wanted you guys to know I'm going to be honest. Okay. I'm going to tell you my guys. I'm not going to withhold here. I want to share. So I want you to share with me if you have a sleeper in this draft class of receivers that you'd like to see fall to you in our draft format, fifth, sixth round type of rookie legacy format.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I really like Lad McConkey out of Georgia.
Who
Um,
doesn't? I've been
I
telling
think.
J-Bo to be quiet about him for a while.
I mean, if you look at it, he's not going to be a true number one target on a team day one. But sleeper wise, if you're talking about like a dynasty kind of stash, I definitely think that he could grow into a big role. He's not. He's somebody that's versatile. He can play in the slot. He can play outside. He's not one of the top 5 guys, but I would say he's definitely within that top 15 to like 10 to 15 range.
I mean, at Georgia, it was Brock Bowers and it was Lad McConkey.
Mm-hmm.
That was the two options. What's the running back's last name? I want to say Hinton. Jabo, you know Georgia's running back's last name?
Oh, Kendall Milton.
Milton. Kendall Milton. He's a good player. He's an effective player. I mean, correct
I
me if
think he's
I'm
a
wrong.
I think he's a Fresno guy too. I think he's from
Oh,
Fresno
really?
too.
Yeah, but I mean those three guys. But Lad McConkey was really the other option. Sans Brock Bowers. And
Mm-hmm.
you watch Lad McConkey in the open field, and the way he cuts on a dime, the defender's just left like, oh, dude, I did not expect that.
Yeah.
He just gives him the stanky leg, and he's gone, bro. He's like,
Yeah,
oh,
I think I think the two. I'm going to throw out two names here. I'm going to get greedy. I'm going to throw out two names here.
Of course,
I
Jabo doesn't do the assignment right.
come on, bro. You have one assignment.
As Pete Carroll told my buddy a long time ago, man, C's get degrees. If you get C's, if you get C's, I'll find a way to get you into SC. But the two guys that I think that people, and really the one guy that I'll probably focus on is Tez Walker from North Carolina. I think Tez Walker got a little bit swept under the radar. Obviously, he went, for people who know, he had a long fighting NCAA dispute with his eligibility situation, so he got onto the field late. But when this guy got onto the field, he was extremely productive. North Carolina as a team had a very up and down year. Other than Drake May and the production that he had from the quarterback position, there was questions about the team and how they performed overall. Questions about the offensive coordinator and some of the play calling. But, you look at a guy 6'2", 195 pounds, runs a 4.36 40, has put it out there on tape. I think one of the things that can work to his advantage is because of the fact that he didn't see as much time on the field. He's well rested. So, as an organization, you're getting a guy who should be, fairly healthy, well rested. You have a guy who's going to come in with a certain energy and a certain chip on their shoulder because of what the individual has had to go through for the past year. So I look at a guy like that, and once again, he's listed at, on the board that I'm looking at right now, he's listed as the 15th best wide receiver prospect. He's right behind the Malachi Corley guy that Aryan mentioned earlier. But I mean, that's another guy. I mean, if you're the Kansas City Chiefs and you're sitting there in the second round and you got a guy like that there, or even, let's say Houston Texans or Cincinnati, with them having to potentially move on from T. Higgins, and them having to fill the shoes of a guy like T. Higgins. I mean, you bring in a guy like Tez Walker, and, I think that's a guy who can come in and make an immediate impact. And then the second guy that I'll just, highlight here shortly is he was the guy that played opposite of Keon Coleman at Florida State. His name's Johnny Wilson. He's a SoCal guy. This guy came in at the combine at 6'6", 237, and this guy ran a four, and this guy ran a 4.5 240. So
Johnny Wilson's a guy.
So he runs a faster 40 than Keon Coleman. And then here's the other thing to think about too. Imagine if you're a defensive back in the ACC and you have to line up and you're in warmups and you sit there and you see 6'3", 215 Keon Coleman, and then you see 6'6", arguably 2'7", 230 plus Johnny Wilson lined up on the other side, and you think you've got two freaking DNs, outside linebackers, both playing the wide receiver position. But that's a guy who I look at, obviously production maybe not as high as what you would expect from a guy like that. He went through a couple different systems, was originally an Arizona State guy, played with Jaden Daniels, ended up coming over and transferring. But Johnny Wilson's a guy that I think, too, if you get that guy in the right system with just his sheer size and ability, I think if you get that guy in the right system with the right opportunity, I think that's another guy who we could be talking about down the road as somebody who could be really, really successful and carve out a very good NFL career.
And
I
Aryan,
agree.
before you say your sleeper, let's also not forget that Jordan Travis got hurt towards the end of the season. So all the FSU production, when you lose your Heisman Trophy candidate quarterback, the whole reason they were out of the college football playoff is just because they didn't think that FSU was a good team without him. So let's not knock the receivers too much for a lack of production because you lose your starting quarterback.
Run a faster 40. That's all I gotta say. No, I'm just
All right.
kidding.
What about you, Aryan? Who do you got? Who do you got as a sleeper
Speaking,
pick?
I mean, speaking of faster 40s, I'm gonna take another Wilson. I'm taking Roman Wilson, and I don't know if you could really call him a sleeper at this point. The guy's a national champion. I think he's maybe consensus, I don't know, 7 or 8 ranked guy. But I see him, falling down some boards, and I don't really understand why. When you watch the tape, he's the go-to guy in critical situations. He creates separation. He can catch in traffic. He's super nimble, like a ninja on the sideline, dude. Just toe tapping, ta 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 ta, and just keeping his speed up. He was a huge weapon for the Wolverines, and the way that they deployed him, I think in today's NFL could be really effective as a slot receiver.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think the tough part. I think the tough part with Roman Wilson is it's kind of like the way that people feel when they have to evaluate JJ McCarthy right now. I think it's hard to get a true sample size of what he's going to look like in the NFL because Michigan's offense and Harbaugh's offense was such a heavy run based offense and it was such a heavy personnel 11, 12, 13 personnel that so much of that stuff you don't see in certain offenses in today's NFL. You wonder how that's going to translate with a guy like that. And obviously, it's two different comparisons with JJ with Wilson, but I think that's the thing that I look at that I think some people are having some issues with. I think they look at obviously the lack of stats and productions with a guy like that, but then you also have to take into consideration that because of the system that a guy like that played in, it's hard to get the true evaluation on a guy like that, and you're gonna have to take a true I don't want to say guess, but you're gonna have to really trust in your evaluation on a guy like that because you're not gonna get all that honest evaluation based off what you see on tape because of what they did on offense.
let me throw out a wild idea here. Let's say the Chargers. I think everybody's kind of saying the Chargers are almost consensus at this point, leaning receiver with that number
Michigan
5 pick
West.
in the first round. Right? Yeah, Michigan West. Let's just say, for a second that we don't go receiver at 5 and we take Brock Bowers if he's available. We snag Brock Bowers and then we wait till the 37 pick and pick up a guy like a Roman Wilson to
Wait,
pair.
did you just say Brock Bowers at 5?
I
I
did.
could see it. I could see it.
I would love
You
it.
guys, you
As a
guys,
Chargers
you
fan.
guys,
Give
you
me
guys
Brock
see
Bowers, bro.
at 5.
What's that?
You guys can see Brock Bowers at 5.
I could
Definitely.
all day,
Definitely.
bro. Twice on Sunday, bro. Come on, look at that.
Kyle Pitts went at 4, and Brock Bowers is arguably a better prospect.
Way better. I would say the
Yeah.
best tight end prospect that I've ever seen personally. I can't
Yes.
think of
Okay. I would.
Pitts, but
I would. Okay. I mean, I would say, and I know we're getting a little bit off the topic here, but I would say that if we were not in a year where the wide receiver class was so generationally talented, the way it's being talked about and the way it's being hyped up about, especially with the guy in front of this class being Marvin Harrison Jr.
yeah,
I think if it wasn't that type of class, that argument would be so much different. But I think when you have a Marvin Harrison Jr., a Roma Dunze, a Neighbors, a Thomas, when you have so many of these guys who have what are considered first round grades, I just, because the other thing is too is, and with the Chargers with Harbaugh, I think it's different because he knows and he traditionally has shown us that he knows how to use the tight end. But the big thing is with the tight end position is you got to know how to be able to use a tight end and what it is that you're doing with your offense.
yeah. I mean, you can do whatever you want with Brock Bowers. That's a whole another episode if we want to get on tight ends. Really, if we did a tight end podcast, we would just talk about Brock Bowers. No offense to the other guys. Like Cade Stover, I guess I kind of like him. Jatavian Sanders.
Well, that's what I was going to say is, let me ask you this. If you're a Charger fan, would you rather have Brock Bowers and somebody like Roman Wilson in the second? or would you rather have a Malik Neighbors and then take a Jatavion Sanders or a Ben Sinnott later in the draft?
Brock Bowers all
Yeah, to
day,
me,
bro. We want to run the ball. Brock Bowers is a bulldog, bro, through and
mhm.
through. Okay, he can run block. He's physical. He can get out there in space. He's George Kittle-esque with his blocking already, and he's in college. You know,
What,
and then you
dude?
pair
What?
with his
Where's
explosivity and his
the
size.
disrespect? Disrespect for our local boy, Stone.
Bro, do not call that disrespect.
Stone, pride of Del Oro High School. You don't believe you're not going to give him a chance?
No, look, Stone had a chance.
Dude, shout out
Great
to Stone too, bro.
Great name, Stone
You better
Smart.
tag him.
You know.
No,
You're gonna say his name on the pod. You better tag his ass.
Oh, he's good friend. He's good friends. I don't know if you guys remember Chapman from Del Campo.
Chappie.
Yeah. His brother is good friends with him. But no, man, shout out to Stone. You know, and obviously we're joking around about it. But here's the one thing I will say about that is knowing Harbaugh, I wouldn't be surprised if they honestly do consider that. But with the depth of this year's wide receiver class, I would not. That is not the worst idea in the world if they feel like they can get both with what they're trying to do. If they feel like they're going to be a heavy 12, 13 personnel team, one back, three tight ends.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you can get a guy like Bowers, and the other thing is too, is we understand this when it comes to the draft. The draft, especially with the way college football is now, there's so many talented guys who come out now. What happens is, right, obviously, as we know, you have 32 picks in the first round. Well, a lot of times now you're getting guys anywhere from 40 to 50 guys with the first round grade. So we sit here and we generally have an idea of 10 to 15 more guys with the first round grade. So, like for these receivers, right, we say 7, 8, 9, 10 receivers, but there's going to be some of those guys that aren't going to go in the first round.
But that's the exact point. Is why you can wait on a receiver. Is
No,
because of how deep
That's
the
what
receiver
he's
is.
agreeing with.
No,
me.
exactly.
Yeah,
I'm agreeing. No, I'm agreeing with you guys. If Harbaugh and them have that thought process and they feel, you know, and obviously Harbaugh has that connection.
How
How about that Harbaugh?
No, and obviously he's got a connection with the guy like Roman Wilson, and Roman Wilson has, you know, that second, third round draft grade. So if he feels like he can get a guy with Bowers, and he has a guy who obviously he's familiar with in a similar system with the guy like Wilson, you know, then he feels like he can get the best of both worlds. And if you want to take it even a step further, you know, if you're comparing, you know, comps, right? Quentin Johnson's that true outside X receiver, and then Roman Wilson's that guy who you can bring in, who you can line up in the slot. You know,
and Joshua Palmer's no bum, dude. Joshua Palmer's no bum. I think he gets overlooked a lot. You know, he's a good, solid, productive player. He's not the guy. I don't think he's going to be the guy. I don't know that Quentin Johnston can be the guy yet. I can't say that with confidence. But
Quentin Johnston can't be the third guy.
Hey, I don't know yet. I think he has the ability, but I don't know if he can be the guy. We'll see, man. Time will tell. I think he may get the opportunity, but I don't think he will get the opportunity to be the guy because I think whoever we pick at 5 is going to be the guy. That's going to be the guy.
Damn,
you know
I
mean?
I just looked up. I just looked up Brock Bowers, and he freaking, you know, he's a little bit smaller than the other guys, but 6'3", 243, but he ran a 4.4 840.
Bro, and
bro,
he does it like he's bro. He's galloping up there, dude. That dude is not. He's just on a different. He's physically built different. You know, he's got a really unique build for the position. Kind of undersized, but bullies dudes in the run game blocking.
Yeah, it's like that one picture that you see of him. It's computer engineer by day, Superman by night.
I know. He's another one of those guys you look at and you go like, this guy, he's
a pro athlete.
Yeah,
that's the type of guy that pisses you off to get pancaked by a guy like that on Saturdays and Sundays.
Bro, he looks like a big ass Hunter Renfro.
You see him out to eat. Yeah.
It's like if you guys remember like those old if you guys remember those old like mic'd up Hard Knocks clips, you know, like Andrew Luck, you know, he'd get his ass dropped and he'd get sacked and then he'd be like, "Oh, thank you." And he'd be like he'd be super nice about it. Like that's the vibe I get with a guy like him. Like he'd be like, "Oh yeah, thank you." My bad. Cool.
Yeah.
No, oh sorry, bro. Did I just did I just run 50 yards and stiff arm you to the ground, bro? Did I
Yeah.
just score a touchdown? My bad, dude.
Let me wipe your pants off, bro.
I feel like
You get all dirty. How'd you get all dirty?
Brock Bowers is the type of guy who apologizes for winning a national championship.
Yeah, bro,
Yeah.
I get it. He needs to be, kind of nice to everybody, man. He's a little extra gifted, bro. You gotta stay humble.
Yeah. All right. Well, to get back on the receivers, I think that there's two big names that we still haven't talked about. So I'm going to give you a would you rather. Would you rather your team draft Troy Franklin out of Oregon, or
No.
that was quick. All right. Would you rather have your team draft Troy Franklin out of Oregon, or would you rather them draft Xavier Worthy out of Texas?
You want to go
I'll
first?
let you handle this. I'll let you handle this. Yeah,
Because I feel like these are the other like last fringe guys in that group of receivers that we've talked about.
I mean,
You
I
know.
would take Xavier Worthy. For the opportunity of that moonshot, bro. Just worth it,
The
dude.
4-2-1.
Come on. Yeah, bro. Bring him to San Fran, bro. Let him just blow the top off once every 15, 20 plays, dude. Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and I'm looking up, the guys right now too, just to confirm what it is that I
4-2 or 4-5?
initially think about those guys. But Xavier Worthy and Troy Franklin, if you look at those guys, just kind of based off my initial what I know about them, is you're talking about guys who are traditional or similar in what their skill sets are, what they're expected to be at the next level. Both guys undersized at the receiver position from a weight perspective. They both kind of fall in that Devontae Smith type size and frame and build.
Without any of the shiftiness.
Well, I mean,
Stop it. You stop that.
I think that, yeah, I think that's a little bit, unfair to say. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, I would go with Xavier Worthy because the thing is, when I look at a guy like that, Steve Sarkisian's offense, some of the stuff that they do in that offense translates to the next level. And that's not to say that what Oregon does can't in Franklin's case do that, but Xavier Worthy for me, I feel like I've seen a bigger sample size of him. I think even him the year before that, he's shown in big games and big moments that he's been able to make those type of plays that you can see from a guy on Sunday that you would expect. One of the big things after he ran that 40, a lot of people were critical of his route running ability. And there's a guy who was his wide receiver coach when he was at Texas, who's now the offensive coordinator at UNLV. He's one of the really popular, big up and coming names in coaching right now, especially in the college football ranks. His name's Brendan Marion, and he made it a point to just say how Xavier Worthy is so much more than a speed guy and how he is a route runner. And I think some of my answer has to do with the fact that I still need to watch and evaluate more of Franklin. And I don't want to be critical of him either because, it's tough. He's a local guy, not essentially to the Sacramento area, but Northern California. He's a guy from the Palo Alto area. EPA, as a lot of people know about it, it's a very popular area for a hotbed of talent for rugby and football players. Devontae Adams, as we know, is from that area as well too. He's an EPA guy, but I would go with Xavier Worthy. I think with what he was able to do at the combine, what he's been able to show production wise 2 years in a row. I mean, I go back to what he did 2 years ago in that Cotton Bowl game against Oklahoma, and some of the plays that he made in that game. I think just even then it proved to me that he was just more than a speed guy. And I think he has the ability to be a dynamic player for a franchise on Sundays.
Agreed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. I think the biggest thing when you look at that 4.2 140, the only thing that I think from a hype perspective is if you look at John Ross, when John Ross broke the record, or at least tied CJ2Ks, and ran a 4.22, and then had literally no production throughout his entire NFL career with the Bengals. Then he went to Kansas City, I think, for a little while, and just never really panned out. So I think that would be the only knock I would say. Not even a knock because it has nothing to do with Xavier Worthy. But I think you got to
Yeah,
look at the hype of the fast receiver. If speed is your only thing, which I don't think it is with Worthy, but if speed is your only thing, I think that can be as a Raider fan, I'm used to us just drafting based off of speed, but it's one of those things that I think he has a lot more to offer than just being fast. So
yeah, and I think the thing, I think when you look at those guys, who you talked about, who were some of those guys who ran the, fastest 40-yard dashes in the past. We look at some of these guys. I'm looking at the list right now. You're talking about a Jacoby Ford. You're talking about Dre Archer. John Ross. When I look at these guys who are at that list, because to the point that you just mentioned, as soon as Xavier Worthy ran that 40, he got compared to those guys, right? And shoot, even one of our buddies in the chat, he had said the same thing. He gave us that rundown of the list of all those guys who were the fastest 40s of all time. And I mean, to his credit, he's right. For the most part, most of those guys didn't end up having very successful NFL careers. But I think if you look at Xavier Worthy's career at Texas and his body of work compared to those other guys, I don't even think it's a comparison. I mean, to be honest with you, we didn't. I mean, and like I said, I know this is going a little bit farther back. Jacoby Ford was not the developed receiver that Xavier Worthy was coming out of Texas. Dre Archer was not the player that he was or that
He was just fast. Where did was he Eastern Carolina? Where did he come from?
Trey Archer was an Akron guy, I believe, and he was
Oh,
a,
okay.
and he was a guy who was mostly, if I'm correct, Dre Archer was a guy who was mostly known as a return specialist. And yeah, I'm looking it up right now. Oh, it was Kent State, not Akron. My bad, but or
Okay.
Akron. Sorry, not Akron, Akron, but
Akron, I like that better.
Akron and Young Jesus.
Hey.
But yeah, I mean, this is a guy who went to Kent State, was mostly known as a return specialist. And, this was a guy who was 5'8, 173. So I look,
A
I
little
look
bit bigger than Worthy.
yeah, I look at those guys who are getting compared to Xavier Worthy, and I don't think the comparison is necessarily fair. Kind of like how sometimes certain guys get elevated with their draft stock strictly because of the 40 they run. Like what happened with some of these guys. Evaluators got so caught up on what it is that these guys did from a combine and testing perspective, they forgot to go back to what the most important thing is that confirms it for you every time, and it's the tape. And
Yeah.
I think once again, if you go back to Xavier Worthy's tape, I think it looks a whole lot different as opposed to some of those other guys who were on those lists in years past.
I mean, the tape speaks for itself, and I think another thing that stands out with Xavier Worthy is those neck tats, bro. He ain't afraid, bro. He's already got it. He's
Great.
already he's already got it.
Oh, hey, I don't know why I thought of the I
Say,
thought of, I
bro.
thought of the Eminem song when you said that. I'm not afraid.
I'm not afraid to tap my neck. Come on, Xavier's Xavier's. I think he's going to be a different type of a dude, and I think he's going to come in with a lot of confidence. And I think we're going to see out of him is something similar to what we've seen out of one of the rookie phenoms from this past season in Tank Dell. I think
So
he can make that type of an impact on an offense, and I think if he gets drafted to a team that gets one of these young stud rookie quarterbacks, which we got a handful of those guys, I think we could see a Tank Dell, CJ Stroud 2.0 with Xavier Worthy leading the charge.
so funny. There's a guy I know on social media. He coached in the Bay Area for a period of time. His shout out to Coach Voss. He's on social media as well too. Very popular guy. Big time coach, very well known in the area. He actually told a story on Twitter recently about how when he was in the Fresno area, because for people who don't know, Xavier Worthy played and he's from the Fresno area, and he played at Central. And this coach was a defensive coordinator, and he coached against Xavier Worthy. And Xavier Worthy's team ended up going 16-0 and winning the state championship. And he said having to game plan against him was just, I mean, it was
unbearable, bro. What are you gonna do?
out of this world. He just said it was one of those things where you couldn't game plan for it, you couldn't coach it, especially at the high school level. For those people who have been at that level, the talent gap in certain areas can be, especially when you got that type of talent, can be quite varying. But that story with Xavier Worthy always sticks out with me as well too. And so he's been highly sought after, and he's been highly considered for a very long time.
Yeah, that's a good point, man. You got a lot of backstory on him.
Yeah, you gonna write a biography anytime soon, or what's going on?
I mean,
right.
Shoot, I'll ask for 10%.
He's like, right, man, guys. You knew the whole story. You deserve it.
Yeah. All right, guys. So we got a couple minutes left. I want to end it with this question before I open it up for you guys to have any final thoughts. Out of the 32 picks in the first round, how many of them are going to be a receiver? With how deep this class is, I'm going to go with 6. I'm going to go with 6 receivers are taken in the first round.
I would say over under 7. I would say that's where the number is. So you would go the under of 7?
I would take the under of 7, but I would say if you're saying 7.5, I would
maybe
still take the under.
Maybe over under 6. Maybe over under 6 is a better number, because I feel like 7 would be kind of a high number for the amount of guys that go in the first round. I think I can see 5 pretty clearly. And I think that because of that, there could be some other teams like, yo, I got to go get Worthy. He's the next best available guy. You see this happen all the time with these receivers that it can just bust the game open like that in one play, bro. Teams are going to just go be like, I got to get that guy.
Yeah,
so you're going to go 7?
I'm going to go 5.
Okay, so you're even taking the under on my number then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just so you guys know, looking at the numbers right now, in the past 5 years, the number has been anywhere from 4 to 6 receivers that have traditionally gone in the first round. So I would say, Aryan, you said 7.
I said 5.
Oh, you said 5. What did you say, Alex?
I said 6, but Aryan said the over-under at 7. So if you take the over or the under.
I changed my mind.
I mean,
yeah, 7 sounds great. I'll take 5, please.
I say 6. I like 5.
No, I mean, and me and Alex talked about this a little bit before you came on, Aryan. We were sitting there looking at the draft order. I think you could legitimately make a case from anywhere from about 6 to 10 teams in the first round having a genuine need for the receiver position. You would obviously think, Arizona is going to have to make a decision there at the wide receiver position. Los Angeles, the Chargers, from what you've heard, it's going to be basically between an offensive lineman or a wide receiver.
Or Brock Bowers, baby.
Or Brock Bowers, obviously, kind of the sleeper that Aryan mentioned earlier. But
I don't even think it's that much of a sleeper. I legitimately think it's likely.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, depending on how much, I'll tell you what, the more that you guys have talked about it here, with this episode, the more I'm it's starting to gain steam for me, especially with the way I know how Harbaugh is. But
exactly,
I could legitimately, and I know this isn't an answer, but I could legitimately see anywhere from 6 to 9 receivers go. But if I was to give a safe number, I would say that you're going to see at least 6 receivers go off the board in the first round.
Yeah. So the main takeaway from this podcast was us trying to convince Jordan that Marvin Harrison's the best in the class. And we ended with the Chargers. We finally convinced him that Brock Bowers is good enough to get drafted at 5.
Yeah. That's
come on, baby. These receivers are great, but check out that tight end.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, do you guys have any closing thoughts before we wrap it on up?
No, man. I just wanted to say thank you for putting this together, Kamish. You're the man. This is just another extension of your fantasy football prowess. Appreciate everything you do, putting that together for us every year. And this is, again, just another part of it that we get to enjoy through you. So applause for my guy putting in that work, and look forward to the next one, man.
Yeah, just to follow up on that point, we really appreciate all you guys for taking the opportunity to listen to us. If you guys can like, share, follow, subscribe, if you guys can, share this on all platforms possible. Obviously, we're just getting started with this. There might be some bumps along the road, but I promise if you guys stick along for it, it's going to be one hell of a ride. And I'm just continuing to look forward to making great content on this amazing platform.
Couldn't have said it better
Let's go.
myself, J-Bo. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, guys, for Alex, Aryan, and Jordan, as always, beat your rivals, build your legacy. We'll see you next time.
Oh, this dude, man. Oh goodness,
Got him.
this motherfucker, man.